Ruth Calloway's knees hit the ground before she could scream. Agnes Pruitt's hand clamped the back of her neck and drove her face into the horse trough, the water slamming into her nostrils like a fist. She thrashed. Her fingers clawed at the wooden rim. Above the water she heard laughter, Coy's laughter, and the voice of the woman who had owned her for 3 years saying, "Hold still, girl. Filth needs washing." If you want to walk beside Ruth through what comes next, subscribe now and stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The water hit her face like a slap from God. Ruth's hands shot out, gripping the splintered edge of the trough. But Agnes Pruitt was stronger than any woman her age had a right to be. Her fingers dug into the back of Ruth's skull, pressing down until Ruth's forehead scraped the bottom. Water flooded her nose, her open mouth. Her lungs seized. She kicked. Her boot caught something, a bucket maybe, and sent it clanging across the stable floor. Above the surface, muffled and distant, she heard Coy laugh. "Hold her steady, Ma. She ain't done." Agnes yanked Ruth's head up. Air rushed in raw and burning. Ruth coughed so hard her ribs ached, water streaming down her chin soaking the front of her dress. Her vision swam. The inside of the stable, tilted hay bale saddle racks, the hot stripe of sunlight cutting through the door. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Agnes said, her voice low and sharp as a skinning knife. "You think you can break my good milk jug and stand there with that dumb look on your face? I didn't—" Ruth started. Agnes shoved her down again. The water closed over her like a lid. Ruth's fingers slipped on the wet wood. Bubbles screamed from her mouth. Her chest burned. 3 seconds. 5. 7. The world narrowed to the pounding in her ears and the iron grip on her neck. When Agnes pulled her up the second time, Ruth's legs gave out. She dropped to the stable floor, gasping, her cheek pressed into the dirt and straw. Water dripped from her hair, pooling dark around her face. Coy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a tobacco plug bulging in his cheek. He spat into the dust. "Reckon she's clean now, Ma." "Not hardly." Agnes wiped her hands on her apron like she'd touched something foul. 3 years I've fed this woman. 3 years she's been under my roof, eating my food, sleeping in my boy's bed after she let him die. Ruth's voice came out cracked and thin. "Thomas died of the fever. I couldn't—" "You couldn't save him." Agnes bent down her face close enough that Ruth could see the broken veins mapped across her cheeks. "That's right. You couldn't do a blessed thing. And now you break what little we got left." It was Coy. Ruth said it before she could stop herself. "He came in drunk last night and knocked it off the shelf. I saw—" The slap came fast and open-handed, snapping Ruth's head sideways. Her ear rang. She tasted copper. "You calling my boy a liar?" Agnes straightened up, her jaw working. "Warren, get the shears." Warren Pruitt stood near the back wall, half hidden behind a stack of feed sacks. He was the youngest, the quietest, the one who looked away when things got bad. His face had gone the color of old candle wax. "Ma, maybe we don't need to—" "I said get the shears." Warren swallowed. He looked at Ruth on the ground, water still running from her hair, her lips split and swelling. Then he turned and walked to the tool bench. Ruth pushed herself up onto her hands. Her arms shook. "Please," she said. "Please don't." "Should have thought about that before you opened your lying mouth." Agnes took the shears from Warren without looking at him. The metal was dull, meant for cutting rope and leather, but the blades were heavy enough. She grabbed a fistful of Ruth's wet hair and pulled until Ruth's neck arched backward. The first cut was ragged. Ruth felt it more than heard it, the tug, the release, the sudden lightness where weight had been. Auburn strands fell into the dirt, curling in the water that pooled around her knees. "Every time," Agnes said, cutting again, "you forget your place." Another fistful, another rough slash. "Every time you look at me with those eyes like you're better than what you are." Ruth stopped fighting. She knelt there in the dirt, and the water her hands flat on the ground, while Agnes cut her hair in jagged chunks that fell around her like something dying. Coy watched from the doorway, chewing slow. Warren had turned his back entirely, his shoulders drawn up to his ears. When Agnes was done, she dropped the shears into the trough with a splash. Ruth's hair hung in uneven patches, some spots cut close to the scalp, others left in ragged tufts. Water and tears had mixed on her face, until she couldn't tell which was which. "Now get up," Agnes said. "There's supper to make, and I want those floors scrubbed before dark." Ruth didn't move. Something in her had gone quiet, not peaceful, not calm, but the kind of quiet that comes when a thing has been pushed past where it can bend. "I said get up." "No." The word came out small, almost nothing, but it stopped Agnes mid-step. Coy unfolded his arms. "What did she say?" "No." Ruth said it again, louder this time, though her voice shook like a wire in the wind. She lifted her head. Water dripped from what was left of her hair. "I'm done." Agnes's face went tight and red. "You're done when I say you can hit me again." Ruth's eyes found the older woman's and held them. "You can cut every hair on my head and shove me under that water until I stop breathing. But I am not scrubbing your floors tonight." For a moment, nobody moved. The stable was so quiet, Ruth could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, the creak of leather, the buzz of flies in the heat. Then Coy pushed off the doorframe and took 2 steps toward her. "Maybe you need help remembering who you belong to." "She don't belong to nobody." The voice came from outside the stable door. Low, unhurried, carrying the dust of a long ride. All 3 Pruitts turned toward it. Silas Drummond stood in the bright square of the doorway, one hand holding a lead rope, the other hanging loose at his side. Behind him, a half-wild Mustang danced at the end of the line, eyes rolling, nostrils flared. Silas didn't look at the horse. His eyes were on Ruth, on the water soaking her dress, the blood on her lip, the ragged remains of her hair. Coy's hand dropped to the knife on his belt. "This ain't your business, Drummond. Came to sell your mama a horse." Silas stepped inside, the lead rope still in his hand. The Mustang snorted and pulled, hooves stamping. "Looks like I walked into something else." Agnes drew herself up. "Family matter. That woman is the wife of my dead son, and she lives under my authority. Now state your business, or get off my property." Silas looked at Ruth. She was still on the ground, her knees in the mud, her hands shaking. But her eyes were open and clear, and in them he saw something he recognized, the same look a horse gets when it's been broken wrong. Not tame, not beaten, just waiting for one more reason to run. "Ma'am," he said to her. Only to her. "You want to stay here?" Ruth's breath hitched. Nobody had asked her that. Not in 3 years. Not once. "Answer the man," Coy sneered. "Tell him you're staying right where you—" "No." Ruth's voice was raw but steady. "I don't want to stay." Silas nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. "Well then." He turned back to Coy, who had drawn the knife now and held it low at his hip. "Reckon we got a problem." "You ain't taking her nowhere." Coy stepped forward. "She's ours, legal and proper." "She's a widow," Silas said. "Last I checked, widows ain't property in Wyoming territory. Not anymore." Agnes's voice cut in sharp and high. "She owes us. 3 years of food, 3 years of shelter. She took clothes, she took nothing." Silas's gaze shifted to Agnes, and something in it made the older woman go still. "Look at her. You reckon she's been eating well under your care? You reckon those bruises came from nowhere?" Coy lunged. Not smart, not planned, just a quick slash with the knife aimed at Silas's midsection. Silas didn't try to dodge. He dropped the lead rope. The Mustang, free and panicked, exploded. 800 pounds of wild horse erupted through the stable hooves, hammering the packed dirt, sending hay flying, knocking a saddle rack sideways with a crash that shook the walls. Coy dove out of the way, hitting the ground hard. Agnes stumbled backward into the feed sacks. Warren pressed himself flat against the wall, hands over his head. In the chaos, Silas reached Ruth. His hand closed around her arm, firm but careful, the grip of a man who knew how to handle frightened things. "Can you stand?" She nodded. He pulled her up. Her knees buckled, but he caught her one arm around her waist, and they moved toward the side door, while the Mustang rampaged through the main aisle, kicking at stall doors, screaming its high, wild scream. They broke into the sunlight. The heat hit Ruth's wet skin like a brand. Silas's horse, a steady gray gelding, stood tied at the fence post, ears pinned back at the noise from inside. "Get on," Silas said. Ruth grabbed the saddle horn and pulled herself up. Her arms screamed. Her ribs ached where Agnes had pressed her against the trough, but she got her leg over and settled into the seat. Silas was behind her in a heartbeat, reaching around her for the reins. Behind them, Coy came stumbling out of the stable, dust in his hair, the knife still in his hand. "You come back here. You hear me? Drummond? She's ours. We'll come for her." Silas didn't answer. He put his heels to the gelding, and they moved out at a canter, fast enough to eat ground but steady enough to hold. Ruth gripped the saddle horn with both hands, her chopped hair whipping around her face, water still dripping down her neck. They rode past the Pruitt fence line, past the dry creek bed, where the cottonwoods stood stunted, and still past the last marker that said she was on Pruitt land. The gelding's hooves drummed a steady rhythm on the baked earth. Ruth didn't look back. She wanted to. Every part of her wanted to turn and see if Coy was following, if Agnes was standing at the fence with her sharp jaw and her sharper tongue calling curses after her. But she kept her eyes forward on the road and the dust, and the man whose arm was a bar of iron around her, holding the reins like he held everything with patience and with no intention of letting go. A mile out, her breathing slowed. 2 miles, and the shaking in her hands quieted to a tremor. At 3 miles, she spoke. "You lost your horse back there, the Mustang." "I know. He was worth money." "He was." "Why?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. The gelding's stride never broke. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals above the dry hills. "Because I've seen what a thing looks like after it's been broken the wrong way," he said. "And I couldn't watch it happen to a person." Ruth closed her eyes. The sun pounded down on them. The land spread wide and open and empty, and somewhere behind them, 3 people were deciding what to do next. She knew Agnes wouldn't let it go, knew Coy would come with more than a knife, knew that whatever safety this man was riding her toward, it was borrowed time with interest. But right now, with the wind in her butchered hair and the steady beat of hooves beneath her, Ruth Calloway felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not safe, not yet, but free. Just for this moment, with the dust of the Pruitt ranch falling away behind her and the open country stretching out like a promise nobody had made. Yet she was free. The gelding carried them west toward the line of hills, where the sun was already leaning heavy and golden, painting the sage with amber light. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. There was nothing to say that the road wasn't already saying for them. Somewhere behind them, a door slammed. Somewhere ahead, the land waited, patient and indifferent, holding space for whatever came next. Ruth's fingers loosened on the saddle horn. Her spine softened just a fraction against the chest of the man behind her, and for the first time in 3 years, she let someone else carry the weight. The gelding's stride slowed to a walk as they crested the last rise before Silas's land. Ruth felt the change in the horse's body, the way its muscles eased, and she understood the animal knew it was home. Silas swung down first and turned to lift her. She flinched when his hands touched her waist, and he stopped. "I'll let you climb down yourself if you'd rather." She shook her head. "No, I'm all right." He lifted her easy, set her on the ground, and stepped back quick, putting space between them like he knew she needed it. Her boots hit packed dirt. Her knees wobbled but held. "Porch," he said, tipping his head toward the cabin. "Sit. I'll get water. Ruth moved toward the bench but stopped when she saw a small rocking chair pushed against the cabin wall. Its paint faded to a ghost of blue. It was a child's chair, too small for anyone over 4 or 5. One of the runners was cracked near the base, and a fine layer of dust sat undisturbed across the seat. She didn't touch it. She sat on the bench and pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. Silas came back with a tin basin, a clean cloth, and a cup of water. He set them beside her, crouched low, and poured until the basin was full. For your face. Take your time. She dipped the cloth and brought it to her skin. The water stung where her lip was split. It ran brown and pink into the basin trough water blood dirt. She wrung the cloth and wiped again, working slow around the swelling under her eye. Silas stood at the porch rail with his back to her, giving her privacy without leaving. Your hand, Ruth said. He turned. She pointed at his left palm. A raw scrape ran across it, red and weeping from the lead rope when the Mustang bolted. It's nothing. It's going to fester in this heat if you don't clean it. She held out the cloth. Sit down. He didn't move for a moment. Then he sat on the far end of the bench and laid his hand open on his knee. She dipped the cloth fresh and pressed it against the scrape. He didn't wince, but she felt the tendons tighten under her fingers. You do this before? He asked. Tend wounds. My father was a schoolteacher in Cheyenne, but folks out there didn't have a proper doctor for 60 miles, so he learned herb medicine from a Shoshone woman who lived near the river. He taught me. She wrapped the cloth around his palm and tied it neat. I can make a poultice from yarrow if you've got any growing nearby. It'll keep the swelling down. Silas looked at his bandaged hand, then at her. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. There's yarrow by the creek bed, he said. I'll show you in the morning. I'll find it myself. Just point me the direction. He almost smiled. Almost. All right. The sun was dropping fast, pulling long shadows across the yard. Ruth's stomach clenched, not from hunger, though she couldn't remember her last full meal, but from the silence. In the Pruitt house, silence always came before the next blow. Mr. Drummond. Silas. Silas. She folded her hands in her lap. Why did you do it back there? You lost a Mustang worth good money. You made enemies of the Pruitts. Coy won't forget this, and Agnes, she holds grudges the way other women hold rosaries. He was quiet for a long time. She thought maybe he wouldn't answer. Then he said, 6 years ago, I had a wife named Eliza and a daughter named Bess. Bess was 4. She had her mother's eyes, and she laughed at everything rain chickens her own shadow. The diphtheria came through in the fall. I was 3 days' ride out chasing wild horses in the Wind River country. By the time I got back, Eliza had been dead 2 days and Bess was dying. Ruth's hands went still. I held her for 6 hours. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't swallow. She'd look at me and try to say something, but nothing came out. His voice didn't crack. It was steady the way a man's voice gets when he's told a story to himself so many times it's worn smooth as river stone. She died just before dawn. I buried them both under the cottonwood behind the barn. Ruth didn't say she was sorry. She'd heard sorry enough times to know how little it weighed. The chair on the porch, she said quietly. That was hers. Eliza made it, carved the runners herself. Bess used to sit in it and sing to the horses. He looked out toward the pasture. I should have fixed that cracked runner. Keep meaning to. You don't fix it because fixing it means she's really gone. He turned his head and looked at her. Really looked, and for a second, the careful distance he kept around himself like a fence thinned to nothing. How'd you know that? Because I still have Thomas's razor in my pocket. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small folding razor, the handle made of bone worn smooth from years of use. He shaved every Sunday morning, even when there was nobody to see him but me and the chickens. I took it the day after he died. Agnes doesn't know I have it. She turned it over in her fingers. I don't keep it because I miss him. I mean, I do miss him. But I keep it because it's proof I had a life before them. Before Agnes and Coy and all of it. Proof that somebody once chose me. The crickets had started up in the grass. Somewhere in the barn a horse stamped and blew. Thomas chose right, Silas said. Ruth looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in 3 years, and she wasn't about to start now. You don't know that. You don't know anything about me. I know you took a beating, and the first thing you said was no. I know you bandaged my hand before you finished cleaning your own face. And I know you've got more steel in you than Coy Pruitt's got in his whole body. He stood up. That's enough for now. He went inside and came back with 2 plates, cold biscuits, a tin of beans, a strip of dried beef on each. He set one in front of her and sat with his own. When did you eat last? He asked. Yesterday. Maybe the day before. Agnes cut my rations after the hens stopped laying. Said I was cursed and the animals could feel it. Silas's jaw tightened. The hens stopped laying because it's 100 degrees and their coops got no shade. Any fool who's kept chickens knows that. Agnes isn't interested in what's true. She's interested in what hurts. They ate in silence. Ruth finished every bite and wanted more, but didn't ask. Silas noticed. He pushed the rest of his biscuit across the table without a word. I can't just take your food. You ain't taking it. I'm giving it. She ate it. It was dry and crumbly, and it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. After the plates were cleared, Silas unrolled a bedroll near the cold hearth. He nodded toward the small room off the main cabin. Bed's in there. Clean sheets. Door shuts if you want it to. Where will you sleep? Right here. On the floor. I've slept on worse. Ruth stood in the doorway of the small room. The bed was narrow, covered with a faded quilt in earth-colored patches. A peg on the wall held a woman's shawl, Eliza's, she guessed. Silas hadn't moved it. Hadn't moved any of it. Silas. Yeah. They'll come. You know that. Agnes will send Coy. And Coy will bring whoever owes them favors. It won't be a talk. I know. And you're still letting me stay. He looked at her across the dim room, his face half lit by the lamp on the table. I spent 6 years keeping this place exactly how Eliza left it. Every cup in the same spot. Every curtain on the same nail. I told myself I was honoring her memory, but the truth is, I was hiding. A man can hide in a dead woman's house for a long time if nobody comes along to remind him he's still alive. He pulled the blanket over his legs and lay back, folding his coat under his head. You reminded me. So yeah, you're staying. Ruth closed the door halfway enough for privacy enough to let the lamplight in. She lay down on the bed that smelled of cedar and dust and the faintest trace of lavender, and she pressed Thomas's razor against her chest and stared at the ceiling. She didn't sleep. Not for a long time. Every creak of the cabin made her flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. But sometime deep in the night, when the lamp had burned down to a dim glow and the only sound was Silas's steady breathing from the other room, her eyes finally closed. She woke to the sound of voices. Not Silas's voice. Voices outside coming from the direction of the road. Ruth sat up fast, heart hammering. Gray dawn light seeped through the window. She swung her legs off the bed and moved to the door. Silas was already up, standing at the front window with the rifle in his hands. He held up one hand without turning. Stay back. Who is it? She whispered. Don't know yet. 2 riders. Coming slow. Ruth pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Her fingers found Thomas's razor in her pocket and gripped it tight, though she knew it was useless against men on horseback. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then a woman's voice called out clear and steady. Silas Drummond. It's Hetty Bowman. Don't you dare point that rifle at me. I've brought breakfast and I mean to eat it warm. Silas lowered the rifle. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh in another life and opened the door. Hetty Bowman rode a spotted mule that looked as stubborn as she did. She was 45, built square and solid, with hands that had run a general store for 15 years since her husband dropped dead hauling flour. Behind her on a second mule sat a boy of about 12, her nephew Jem, holding a basket covered with a checked cloth. Hetty swung down, handed her reins to Jem, and walked straight past Silas into the cabin like she owned the place. She spotted Ruth standing by the bedroom door and stopped. Her eyes moved over Ruth's face, the split lip, the bruised cheekbone, the butchered hair standing up in ragged tufts. Hetty's expression didn't change, but her hand came up and pressed flat against her own chest, as if something inside had just cracked. "Oh, honey," she said. "Oh, Ruth." Ruth's throat closed. She'd held it together through the trough, through the cutting, through the long ride and the dark night. But something about Hetty's voice, the softness of it, the way it sounded like something she'd almost forgotten, broke the seal. "Don't," Ruth said, her voice tight. "Don't be kind to me right now. I'll fall apart." "Then fall apart. You've earned it." Ruth shook her head hard. "No, I need to think. I need to. How did you know I was here?" Hetty set the basket on the table and began unpacking. Biscuits, a jar of blackberry jam, a slab of ham wrapped in wax paper. "Half the town saw Silas ride out of the Pruitt place with you yesterday. The other half heard Agnes screaming about it before sundown. I put together which way he'd ride and came at first light. Is Agnes? Agnes is telling everyone in Copper Bend that you stole silver and Silas abducted you. She's got Coy rounding up men. I heard him at the saloon last night buying drinks and talking about how a horsebreaker stole his brother's widow and how they meant to get her back." Ruth sat down hard on the bench. "How many men?" "3, maybe 4 besides Coy. Nobody serious yet. But you know Coy. He keeps buying whiskey and keeps talking, and sooner or later some fool's going to think it sounds like a righteous cause." Silas leaned the rifle against the wall. "What about the sheriff?" "Ed Mackey rode out to Fort Laramie 3 days ago. Deputy's a boy named Billy Sutter who's 19 years old and scared of his own shadow. He won't stand up to Coy Pruitt, and Coy knows it." "When's Mackey due back?" "A week, maybe more." Silas and Ruth looked at each other across the cabin. A week was a long time when a man like Coy had whiskey and a grudge. Hetty poured 3 cups of coffee from the pot Silas had put on and set them on the table. "Now sit down, both of you, and eat. You look like you haven't had a decent meal between you since last Christmas." They ate. Ruth tried to go slow, but the biscuits were warm, and the jam was sweet, and her body took over before her pride could stop it. Hetty watched her with steady eyes, saying nothing about how fast the food disappeared. "Ruth." Hetty's voice was careful now. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did Agnes ever do this before? Not just yesterday. Before." Ruth set down her biscuit. She looked at the table, at her hands, at the bruises ringing her wrists where Coy had held her still. "The first time was 6 months after Thomas died. Agnes said my hair was too bright, said red hair was a sign of wickedness, and that's why Thomas got sick. She cut it to my shoulders and told me to keep it covered." Ruth's voice was flat, like she was reciting a list. "After that, it was whenever something went wrong. A fence broke, my fault. Cow went dry, my fault. Coy lost money gambling, my fault. She'd make me kneel in the yard and she'd cut it shorter each time." "And nobody in town said a word," Hetty said. "It wasn't a question. Folks saw. They just figured it was family business." Hetty's hand came down flat on the table, hard enough to rattle the cups. "Family business. That's what they said when my sister's husband broke her arm in 2 places. Family business. Like a woman's bones are a private matter." "Hetty." Silas's voice was quiet but firm. "What do you need from town?" "I need people to know the truth before Agnes sets it in stone. Right now, it's her word against nobody, because Ruth's been invisible for 3 years. If folks hear what really happened, the trough, the shears, the starving, some of them might think twice about riding with Coy. You think talk's going to stop him. Talk won't stop Coy, but it might stop the men he's trying to recruit. Take away his numbers, and he's just one mean drunk with a knife." Hetty stood and brushed crumbs from her skirt. "I'm going back to town. I'll talk to Reverend Hollis and Doc Saunders. They've both got weight in Copper Bend. If they speak against Agnes publicly, it changes things." She turned to Ruth. I've been slipping you flour and salt for 2 years through the back door of my store when Agnes wasn't looking. You think I did that because I didn't know what was happening to you? Ruth's eyes stung. I thought you were just being kind. I was being a coward. Kind is what I should have been a long time ago. Hetty pulled on her riding gloves. I'm fixing that now. She walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at Silas. You keep that rifle loaded, and you. She pointed at Ruth. You stop thinking you deserve what they did to you. That's Agnes talking, not the truth. Hetty mounted her mule, Jem falling in behind her, and they rode back toward the road, the dust of their passing hanging gold in the early light. Ruth stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared. Then she turned to Silas. A week until the sheriff comes back. Coy won't wait a week. No, he won't. So what do we do? Silas picked up the rifle and checked the action, working the lever with practiced hands. We don't run. You run from a man like Coy, he chases you forever. You stand, and eventually he has to decide if it's worth the cost. And if he decides it is, then I make sure the cost is high enough to change his mind. Ruth looked at him, this man she'd known less than a day, who slept on his own floor so she could have the bed, who'd lost a Mustang and made an enemy of the meanest family in the county, for a woman he'd never spoken to before yesterday. Silas, you've already given up too much for me. If I left, just rode out, went to Cheyenne or further, they'd leave you alone. Probably. Then maybe I should go. He set the rifle down and looked at her straight. You know what Eliza said to me the night before I left on that last horse run? She said, Silas, you're so busy chasing what's wild, you forget to protect what's tame. I've thought about that every day for 6 years. Every single day. And I swore if I ever got another chance to stand where I should have stood, I wouldn't ride off. His voice dropped rough at the edges. You're not going to Cheyenne, and I'm not going to watch another woman disappear because I wasn't brave enough to stay. Ruth's fingers curled at her sides. The razor in her pocket pressed against her hip like a heartbeat. You don't owe me anything. This ain't about owing. Then what is it about? He held her gaze, and for a moment the distance between them, the stranger distance, the careful politeness of two people who'd met through violence, thinned like morning fog. It's about standing right, he said. And it's been too long since I've done that. From somewhere beyond the fence line, carried thin on the summer wind, came the distant sound of a dog barking. Then nothing. Then the quiet that settles over open country when the heat presses down and even the birds go still. Ruth listened to it. The quiet. The big empty quiet of land that didn't care who owned it or who bled on it or who was buried under it. And inside that quiet, something shifted. Small, fragile, no bigger than a seed in the place behind her ribs, where hope used to live. She didn't trust it, not yet, but she didn't push it away. Show me where the yarrow grows, she said. Your hand needs a proper poultice before it goes bad. Silas picked up his hat from the porch rail. Yes, ma'am. They walked out together past the barn, past the fence where the gelding stood switching flies toward the creek bed, where the summer heat shimmered and the yarrow grew white and stubborn in the dry soil. Behind them, the cabin sat quiet in the sun, the little blue rocking chair still on the porch, its cracked runner casting a thin shadow across the boards. And on the road beyond the ridge, where the dust hadn't quite settled from Hetty's passing, the air held the faint vibration of something coming, not yet visible, not yet certain, but as real and as inevitable as the storm clouds building along the far horizon. The yarrow grew thick along the creek bed, white clusters pushing up between the rocks, like the land was trying to heal itself. Ruth knelt and stripped the stems with quick hands, bundling the leaves into her apron. Silas watched her work, the way her fingers moved, with a sureness that didn't match the trembling he'd seen the night before. You'll need to chew the first batch, she said without looking up. Spit it into the cloth and hold it against the scrape. Change it twice before nightfall. Chew it. That's what I said. Tastes like dirt and turpentine. Then it's working. She stood brushing her knees and handed him a fistful of crushed leaves. "My father used to say medicine that tastes good is lying to you." He took the yarrow and put it in his mouth without argument. His face tightened, but he chewed. Ruth almost smiled. Almost. They walked back toward the cabin, and that's when she heard it, a horse in the barn. Not the gelding, something else. A high, thin whinny followed by the crack of hooves against wood. "What's in the barn?" she asked. "Mare. Came in 2 weeks ago, half-starved, lame in the left foreleg. Found her wandering the ridge. Couldn't get close enough to check the leg proper. She kicks if you come within arm's reach." Ruth changed direction without asking and walked toward the barn. Silas followed the yarrow poultice forgotten in his hand. Inside, the mare stood in the far corner of the stall, ears pinned, flat nostrils wide. She was a sorrel, maybe 14 hands, her ribs showing through a dull coat. When Ruth stepped closer, the mare lunged at the stall door, teeth bared. "Careful," Silas said. Ruth didn't step back. She stood still, her hands at her sides, and she began to hum. Low and tuneless, barely a sound at all, more a vibration in her chest than a melody. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again. Her head dropped an inch. Ruth reached into her apron and pulled out a handful of yarrow. She held it flat on her open palm and extended her arm, slow, so slow it barely seemed like movement. The mare's nostrils flared. She stretched her neck, lips trembling over Ruth's hand, and took the yarrow. While the horse chewed, Ruth stepped to the stall door and unlatched it. Silas started forward, but she held up her other hand. "Wait." She slipped inside, still humming, and moved along the mare's left side, her fingers trailing light over the shoulder, the barrel down to the foreleg. The mare flinched, but didn't kick. Ruth crouched and ran her thumb along the cannon bone, then lower, pressing gently around the fetlock. The mare shifted her weight and snorted. "It's not broken," Ruth said. "Abscess in the hoof. See how she won't put full weight on it. The heat's all in the sole." She looked up at Silas. "You got Epsom salts?" "In the tack room." "I need a bucket of warm water. The salt's in a clean rag. I can draw it out, but I'll need to soak the hoof twice a day for a week." Silas leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "You just walked into a stall with a horse that's tried to bite me every day for 2 weeks. She's not mean. She's in pain. There's a difference." Ruth's hand was still on the mare's leg and the horse hadn't moved. "Pain makes you lash out at the nearest thing. Doesn't mean you want to." Something passed across Silas's face that had nothing to do with horses. He brought the salts and the water without another word. Ruth soaked the hoof. The mare standing quiet now, her head low, and when it was done, Ruth dried the leg and wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth. She came out of the stall with straw in her butchered hair and dirt on her dress, and Silas handed her a cup of water. "You're good with animals," he said. "I'm good with anything that's been hurt." They didn't speak again until midday, working in the quiet way of two people who understood that silence wasn't absence. Silas mended the corral fence. Ruth swept the cabin, washed the breakfast dishes, and found a needle and thread in a tin box on the shelf. She sat on the porch and began hemming the torn seam of her dress where Agnes had grabbed it. It was past noon when the sound of hooves brought them both to their feet. Not Hetty this time. A single rider moving fast, coming from the direction of town. Silas had the rifle in his hands before Ruth could stand. The rider came into view, a boy maybe 15, on a lathered horse. He pulled up hard at the fence line, the horse blowing and stamping. "Mr. Drummond, sir." The boy was breathing almost as hard as his horse. "Mrs. Bowman sent me. She said to tell you Coy Pruitt's been at the saloon since last night. He's got 5 men now, and he's been saying he's riding out here before sundown." Silas's hand tightened on the rifle. 5 men. "Yes, sir. 3 of 'em are ranch hands from the Tucker place. One's Grady Ellis, he runs the livery. And the last one?" The boy swallowed. "The last one's Warren Pruitt." Ruth went still. Warren, the quiet one, the one who'd turned his back in the stable while Agnes cut her hair. She'd thought she'd hoped he might have been different. "Warren," she said softly. "Mrs. Bowman says to tell you she talked to Reverend Hollis and Doc Saunders. Reverend wouldn't take a side. Said it was a domestic matter and the Lord would sort it out. Doc Saunders said he'd speak up, but not until the sheriff gets back." "Cowards," Ruth said. The word came out hard and flat. "There's one more thing." The boy shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Pruitt, the old one, she went to Deputy Sutter this morning. Told him Mrs. Calloway stole a silver locket and $40 in cash. The deputy wrote it up. She's got a warrant now, ma'am, for theft." Ruth sat down on the porch step. A warrant. Agnes had turned her from a victim into a criminal with nothing but her word and a boy deputy too green to question it. "I never stole anything," Ruth said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "I left that house with the dress on my back and Thomas's razor. That's all I have in this world." "I know that," Silas said, "and when the sheriff gets back, he'll know it too." "The sheriff's a week away. Coy's coming before sundown." Ruth looked up at him. "This is what Agnes does. She doesn't just hit you. She makes sure everyone believes you deserved it." Silas reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out 2 silver coins. He tossed them to the boy. "Ride to the Mackey Ranch. Tell Ed's wife what's happening. Ask her to send word to Fort Laramie. If Ed Mackey's anywhere in earshot, he'll ride back." "Yes, sir." The boy wheeled his horse and was gone, dust rising behind him like a curtain. Ruth stood up. "That won't be fast enough." "It's not meant to be. It's meant to be later. Right now I need to think about tonight." Silas walked to the barn and came back with a box of cartridges. He sat on the porch and began loading the rifle, his bandaged hand working steady despite the wound. "Can you shoot?" "Thomas taught me. I'm not fast, but I can hit what I aim at." He went inside and came back with a second gun, a Colt revolver, old but well kept. He held it out to her grip first. Ruth took it. The weight felt wrong in her hand, heavy and final. She turned it over, checked the cylinder the way Thomas had shown her years ago. "I don't want to shoot anyone," she said. "Neither do I, but I'd rather have it and not need it." That's what Thomas used to say, right before everything went wrong. Silas looked at her, and for the first time she saw something crack behind his eyes. Not pity, not tenderness, but a kind of fierce, stubborn recognition. Like he was looking at a mirror he hadn't expected. "Ruth, if they come, and it goes bad, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "The mare in the barn. The one you fixed up this morning. She's not sound enough to ride hard, but she'll carry you at a walk. If things go sideways, you take her and you ride north. There's a homestead 12 miles up, woman named Grace Fenton. She'll take you in. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. I'm not asking, I'm telling." Ruth's chin lifted. "And I'm telling you no. I ran from one house where people made my choices for me. I'm not starting that again here." The words hung between them, sharp and bright. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away, worked his jaw, and when he looked back, the fight had gone out of his expression, replaced by something closer to wonder. "Eliza would have said the same damn thing," he muttered. "Then Eliza was a smart woman. Smarter than me, that's for sure." The afternoon burned on. They worked together to prepare, not frantically, not with fear, but with the steady purpose of people who understood what was coming and refused to waste time on panic. Ruth filled every water bucket in the cabin and set them by the door in case of fire. Silas checked every window latch, every hinge, every line of sight from the porch to the road. At 4 o'clock, Hetty Bowman rode in again alone. This time, her face flushed and grim. "Coy's left the saloon," she said, swinging down from the mule. "He's gathering at the Pruitt place. Agnes is feeding them supper. They'll ride after dark." "After dark," Silas repeated. "Coy's not stupid enough to come in daylight where people can see what he does." Hetty tied the mule and climbed the porch steps. "But I brought something that might change the game." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed at the edges, the creases worn thin from handling. "What's that?" Ruth asked. "I've run that store for 15 years. People forget what they say in front of the woman behind the counter. Agnes Pruitt came to me 8 months after Thomas died drunk on communion wine, don't ask, and she told me something I wrote down that same night because I knew one day it would matter." Hetty unfolded the paper and read aloud. Agnes Pruitt stated that her own mother-in-law, Ida Pruitt, cut her hair and locked her in a root cellar for 3 days after the death of Agnes's first child. Agnes stated that Ida told her it was her punishment for letting the baby die. Agnes stated, and I quote, "The old witch broke me, and I swore I'd break every woman who came into this family the same way." Ruth's hand went to her mouth. The air in the cabin went thick and still. "She told you that," Ruth whispered. "She was crying when she said it. Only time I ever saw Agnes Pruitt cry." Hetty folded the paper. "This doesn't excuse what she's done, but it explains it. And more importantly, it proves a pattern. When Ed Mackey gets back, this goes on his desk, alongside Ruth's testimony. It won't stop Coy tonight, but it'll stop Agnes from ever doing this to another woman. If we make it through tonight," Silas said. "You'll make it through tonight." Hetty reached under her coat and pulled out a shotgun, short-barreled and ugly. "Because I'm not leaving." "Hetty, this isn't your fight." "The hell it isn't. I've watched through my store window for 3 years, while that woman starved Ruth and beat her and cut her hair. And I told myself it wasn't my place. I slipped her flour like that made up for it. It didn't. So I'm done standing behind my counter, and I'm done telling myself someone else will fix it." She cracked the shotgun open, checked both barrels, and snapped it shut. "Now show me where you want me." Silas looked at Hetty, then at Ruth, then at the 2 guns and the cabin, and the open land stretching out to the ridge where the road came in. 3 people against 5 men and a woman who'd rather burn the world than lose her grip on it. "Hetty takes the barn," he said. "Side window faces the road. Good angle, good cover. Ruth, you're at the back window of the bedroom. If anyone tries to come around the cabin, you'll see them first." "And you?" Ruth asked. "Front porch, where they can see me." "That makes you a target." "That makes me the first thing they have to deal with. And while they're dealing with me, they won't be watching the sides." Ruth wanted to argue. She could feel the argument building in her chest like a scream. But she looked at his face, steady, calm, the face of a man who'd made peace with what the night might cost, and she swallowed it. "If something happens to you," she said, "I won't forgive you. If something happens to me, I won't be around to mind." "That's not funny." "Wasn't trying to be." The sun began its long slide toward the ridge. Ruth sat on the porch and watched it go, the Colt heavy in her lap, the yarrow she'd picked that morning still scattered on the table inside. Such an ordinary morning it had been. Picking herbs, fixing a horse's hoof, learning that the man who'd saved her carried his own dead the same way she carried hers, close to the chest where the weight never eased. Hetty came out with 3 cups of coffee. They drank it sitting in a row on the porch, 3 people with 3 guns watching the light fade. "Ruth," Hetty said, "there's something I should tell you before it gets dark." "What?" "Warren came to the store this afternoon, before Coy gathered everyone at the Pruitt place." Ruth's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "What did he want?" "He wanted me to tell you he was sorry. He said he stood there in that stable and watched his mother shove your head under water, and he didn't move, and it's been eating at him since you left." "Sorry doesn't mean much from a man who's riding with Coy tonight." "That's what I told him, and he said these were his exact words. He said, 'I'm riding with Coy, because if I don't, my mother will cut me out the same way she cut Ruth, but I'm not going to hurt anyone. I give you my word on that.'" Ruth set her cup down. "You believe him?" "I believe he's scared. Scared of Agnes, scared of Coy, scared of his own shadow. Whether that means he'll do right when it counts," Hetty shrugged, "that's between him and God." The last of the sun slipped behind the ridge. The air cooled fast the way it does in high country when the light goes, and the stars began to show hard and bright above the dark line of the hills. Silas stood. Time. Hetty took her shotgun and walked to the barn without a word. Ruth went inside and took her position at the back window. Silas sat on the porch, the rifle across his knees, his eyes on the road. The night settled in around them. Crickets. Wind. The creak of the windmill turning slow. Ruth's hands were steady on the Colt, but her heart was hammering so loud she was sure they could hear it outside. An hour passed, then 2. The moon rose thin and sharp, throwing silver light across the pasture. Ruth's eyes ached from staring into the dark. She was about to shift her position when she heard it. Hooves. Not one horse, not two. Many. Coming steady up the road, the sound growing like distant thunder rolling in off the plains. Ruth's breath caught. She pressed her back against the wall and held the Colt with both hands, the barrel pointed at the ceiling the way Thomas had taught her. Wait until you see them. Don't waste a shot on shadows. From the porch, Silas's voice came low and clear. They're here. Ruth closed her eyes for 1 second. She thought of Thomas's razor in her pocket. She thought of the mare in the barn, quiet, now trusting her because she'd taken the pain away. She thought of Silas sleeping on the floor so she could have the bed, and Hetty cracking open a shotgun with hands that had measured flour and sugar for 15 years and never held a weapon until today. She opened her eyes and faced the window. The hoofbeats stopped. Then Coy Pruitt's voice split the darkness like a blade. Drummond, send her out, and we'll leave peaceful. You got my word. Silas didn't answer. The silence stretched so tight, Ruth could feel it humming in her teeth. I said send her out. Coy's voice rose ragged at the edges, the sound of a man who'd been drinking courage all day and was starting to feel it slip. She's a thief, and she belongs to my family, and you ain't got no right to keep her. Silas's reply came quiet, but it carried clean across the yard like a stone skipping over still water. Come and take her then. The silence after Silas's words lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Coy laughed a short, ugly sound that had no humor in it. You hear that boy's horsebreaker thinks he's tough. 1 man, 1 rifle, and somebody else's widow. Real impressive. Ruth pressed closer to the bedroom window. She could make out shapes now, 5 riders spread in a loose line beyond the fence. The wagon sat further back on the road, and in the bed of it, Agnes Pruitt's silhouette was straight as a post, her head turned toward the cabin. Drummond. A different voice this time. Grady Ellis, the liveryman. He sounded less sure than Coy, his words careful. Nobody wants trouble. Mrs. Pruitt just wants the girl back and the goods she took. Hand her over and we ride home. There are no goods, Silas said from the porch. The woman left that house with nothing but bruises and a torn dress. You want to search for silver that doesn't exist. You come back in daylight with the sheriff. Sheriff ain't here, Coy cut in, and I'm done talking. A horse moved forward. Ruth heard the creak of leather, the jingle of a bit. Then Coy's voice again, lower now, directed at the men behind him. Tucker boys go around the back. Grady, you take the far side. Warren, you're with me. Ruth's grip tightened on the Colt. They were splitting up, flanking the cabin. She shifted to the far edge of the window where she could see the corner of the house. Silas, she called through the cabin, keeping her voice low. 2 coming around the back. I heard. Hold your position. Boots hit the ground, Coy dismounting. Ruth could hear him walking toward the fence, his steps deliberate, each one a challenge. Then the click of a gate latch. Last chance, Drummond. Silas's rifle cocked. The sound was small and precise in the darkness, and it stopped Coy's boots dead. You step through that gate, Silas said, and I'll put you down before your next foot hits dirt. That's not a threat, Coy. That's arithmetic. You won't shoot, not in front of witnesses. Try me. A long pause. Ruth heard Coy's breathing, heavy and harsh. Then his boots shuffled backward 1 step 2, and he cursed under his breath. Fine, fine. We'll do it different. Ruth heard him walk back toward the horses. Muffled words she couldn't make out. Then the sound she'd been dreading since Hetty first warned them, the scratch and flare of a match. Silas! Ruth shouted. Fire! The torch arced through the darkness like a falling star and hit the barn roof. Dry timber, dry summer, 2 months without real rain. The flames caught and spread with a sound like tearing cloth. In seconds, the whole north side of the roof was burning orange light, washing over the yard and throwing wild shadows against the cabin walls. From inside the barn, Hetty screamed, not in fear, in fury. You sons of the horses are in here! Ruth was already moving. She shoved through the bedroom door and ran for the front of the cabin. Silas caught her arm as she came through. The mare, Ruth said, pulling against his grip. She's in there. Hetty's in there. I know. Stay here. I'm not. Ruth. His eyes held hers in the firelight, and for 1 second, the whole night narrowed to the two of them and the heat rolling off the barn. Cover the front. If anyone comes through that gate while I'm in the barn, you shoot. Don't think. Shoot. He pressed the rifle into her hands and ran. Ruth watched him cross the yard in long strides, the fire painting his back, gold and black. He hit the barn door with his shoulder and disappeared inside. Smoke billowed out behind him, thick and choking. She turned back to the gate, the rifle up her cheek against the stock. Her hands were shaking. She locked her elbows and breathed the way Thomas had taught her, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow. The fire made everything visible. She could see Coy standing by the fence, his face lit orange, grinning. Behind him, Grady Ellis sat his horse with his hat pulled low, not grinning at all. The Tucker boys had come back around to the front, drawn by the flames. And Warren. Warren stood apart from all of them near the wagon where Agnes sat. His arms hung at his sides. He wasn't holding a weapon. Now then, Coy shouted toward the burning barn. That's what happens when you take what ain't yours, Drummond. Send her out, or I'll light the cabin next. Ruth's finger found the trigger. She sighted down the barrel at Coy's chest. 20 yards. She could make this shot. Thomas had taught her on targets at 30, and she'd hit them more often than not. But pulling a trigger on paper wasn't pulling a trigger on a man. Her finger trembled. Sweat ran into her eyes. Then Hetty's voice came from the barn. Not a scream this time, but a sharp command. Get the door! Other door! Move! And Ruth heard hooves panicked and thundering as Silas drove the horses out through the back of the barn. 3 horses burst into the pasture, the gelding a bay and the sorrel mare running wild with terror, their coats streaked with ash. Behind them came Silas, half carrying Hetty, her sleeve singed black, her face smeared with soot. She's hurt, Silas called as he brought Hetty toward the porch. Ruth lowered the rifle and ran to them. Hetty's left arm hung wrong, the skin from wrist to elbow, angry and red, already blistering. It's not bad, Hetty said through gritted teeth. Beam fell. I'm fine. You're burned. I said I'm fine. Give me the shotgun and put me somewhere useful. Hetty? The shotgun, Ruth. Ruth retrieved it from where Hetty had dropped it near the barn door. The stock was warm from the heat. She handed it over, and Hetty took it one-handed, tucking the barrel under her injured arm with a wince she tried to hide. From the fence line, Coy's voice came again. Real pretty, Drummond. Real pretty. Now your barn's gone, and your horses are scattered, and it's still 3 of you against 5 of us. How long you want to keep this going? Silas stepped off the porch and walked toward the gate, not fast, not slow. The fire behind him threw his shadow long across the yard, stretching all the way to Coy's boots. You burned my barn, Silas said. His voice was different now, not the steady calm Ruth had heard before. Something underneath it had shifted like a river that looks smooth until you step in and feel the current pulling at your legs. You burned my barn with animals inside, with a woman inside. Shouldn't have been in there. You could have killed her. Could have, didn't. Now hand over. I built that barn the year I buried my wife. Silas's voice dropped low, and every man in the yard went quiet. I built it with timber. I cut myself because I needed something to do with my hands, or I was going to lose my mind. Every board, every nail. I put my grief into that wood, and you just burned it because a bitter old woman told you a widow belongs to her. Coy shifted on his feet. This ain't about... It's about a woman who lost her husband and got treated worse than a dog for 3 years. It's about your mother shoving her head into a water trough and cutting her hair because she needed someone to punish for being alive while Thomas is dead. And you stood there and laughed. Silas took another step forward. You laughed, Coy. She owed you nothing. Your brother died of a fever. Ruth didn't bring it. Ruth didn't cause it. Ruth nursed him while he was burning alive with it, and when he died, your mother blamed her because blaming yourself is harder. Shut your mouth, Drummond. Coy's hand went to his revolver. Shut your damn mouth. You want to draw on me, go ahead. But those men behind you, Grady the Tucker boys, they came because Agnes told them Ruth was a thief. You going to tell them the truth, or should I? Grady Ellis pushed his hat back. What's he talking about, Coy? He's lying. She stole. She didn't steal anything. The voice came from the wagon. Not Agnes. Warren. Every head turned. Warren Pruitt climbed down from beside his mother, his boots hitting the dirt with a sound that seemed too loud. Agnes grabbed at his arm, but he pulled free. Warren, you sit down this instant. No, Ma. His voice cracked on the word, and he swallowed hard, but he kept walking toward the fence, toward the fire, toward all of it. She didn't steal anything. There's no silver locket. There's no $40. You made it up to get the warrant. I was standing right there when you told Deputy Sutter, and I knew it was a lie. I knew it, and I didn't say a word. Warren Pruitt, don't you dare. And the water trough. Warren's voice was shaking now, but he kept going like a man walking into a river knowing the current would take him. I watched you hold her under. I watched her thrash and choke, and I just stood there. I've been standing there for 3 years, Ma, watching you do to her exactly what Grandma Ida did to you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to quiet the flames, settling into a steady crackle. Agnes rose in the wagon bed. Her face was a mask, white and rigid, her eyes burning hotter than the barn behind them. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you speak that woman's name? Ida locked you in a root cellar for 3 days after your baby died." Warren's voice steadied. "You told Hetty Bowman. You said Ida broke you, and you swore you'd break every woman who came into this family. Those were your words, Ma, not mine." "That's a lie. That's a filthy lie." "It's not." Hetty stepped forward, the paper in her good hand, holding it up so the firelight caught the writing. "I wrote it down the night she said it, dated, word for word, and I'll swear to it before the sheriff, the judge, and the good Lord himself." Grady Ellis looked at the paper. He looked at Agnes. He looked at Ruth, standing on the porch with her chopped hair and her bruised face, holding a rifle she didn't want to use. Then he pulled his horse back away from the fence. "I didn't sign up for this," Grady said. "You told me she was a thief, Coy. You told me she stole from your family, and this was about justice. This ain't justice. This is something else entirely. Grady, don't you go soft on me. I'm going home." Grady turned his horse. "Tucker boys, you coming?" The two ranch hands looked at each other. The older one, a broad-shouldered man with a sunburned neck, tipped his hat toward Silas. "Sorry for the trouble, mister. We was told wrong." They rode out behind Grady, 3 horses moving fast down the road, and the sound of their hooves faded until there was nothing left but the pop and hiss of the burning barn and the hard breathing of the people still standing. Coy stood alone at the fence. His hand was still on his revolver. His face was twisted with something worse than anger, the look of a man whose foundation has cracked and who's trying to hold the walls up by force. "It don't matter," he said, his voice tight. "It don't matter what they say or what they wrote down. She's my brother's wife. She belongs... I don't belong to you, Coy." Ruth stepped off the porch. She walked across the yard past Silas, past the heat of the burning barn, until she stood 10 feet from the fence with the rifle at her side. I don't belong to your mother. I don't belong to your family. Thomas married me because he loved me, and I married him because I loved him back, and when he died, I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, not because I owed you, not because I was yours. You shut your mouth. I'm not finished. Ruth's voice didn't rise, but it hardened into something Coy couldn't talk over. Your mother shoved my face into a horse trough and held me underwater until I couldn't breathe. She cut my hair so many times I lost count. She fed me scraps and called me cursed and made me sleep on the floor when it was cold enough to see my own breath. And you watched. Every time, Coy. You watched and you laughed. She was disciplining. She was torturing me. And you let her because it made you feel powerful. Because as long as there was someone lower than you in that house, you didn't have to face the fact that you're a drunk who gambles away his wages and blames everyone else when his life falls apart. Coy's face went white. His hand tightened on the revolver. For one terrible second, Ruth thought he would draw. Then Warren stepped between them. Move, Warren. No. I said move. And I said no. Warren faced his brother, and Ruth could see his hands trembling at his sides, but his feet didn't shift. You want to shoot her, you go through me first. Then you explain to Ma why both her sons are dead. Coy stared at his brother. His jaw worked. His fingers flexed on the grip of the revolver, open, closed, open again. Ruth watched those fingers and held her breath. You're choosing her over your own blood. Coy's voice came out ragged. I'm choosing right over wrong. First time in my life. Warren's voice broke on the last word, and he didn't try to fix it. Should have done it a long time ago. From the wagon, Agnes Pruitt hadn't moved. She sat rigid in the bed, her hands gripping her skirts, her face carved from something harder than stone. But Ruth saw it, the tremor in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes. Not remorse. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But recognition. The look of a woman watching her own reflection in her son's words and hating what she saw. Agnes, Ruth said. The older woman's eyes snapped to her. I know what Ida did to you, and I'm sorry for it. Truly, no woman should be broken the way you were broken. But you had a choice. You could have ended it with you. You could have looked at me and seen yourself and said, not again. Not in my house. You didn't. You passed it on like a sickness, and you told yourself it was your right. Agnes's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twisted in her skirt so hard, Ruth heard the fabric strain. It stops here, Ruth said. Whether you want it to or not, it stops tonight. Coy let go of the revolver. His hand dropped to his side and the fight went out of him all at once like someone had pulled a plug. He looked older, suddenly, smaller, standing there by the fence with the fire dying behind him and his brother's back turned against him. This ain't over, he said, but the words had no teeth left. They were just sound, the echo of a threat that had already spent itself. Yes, it is, Silas said. He'd been standing silent through all of it, the rifle at his side, watching Ruth with an expression she couldn't read in the firelight. It's over, Coy. Take your mother home. Coy looked at Warren. You coming? Warren didn't turn around. I'll walk. Suit yourself. Coy mounted his horse and rode to the wagon. He climbed up beside Agnes without a word, took the reins and drove the wagon around. Agnes didn't look back. She sat facing forward, her spine straight, her jaw locked, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if the night behind her had already ceased to exist. The sound of the wagon wheels faded, slow, grinding over dirt and stone, until the darkness swallowed it whole. Warren stood by the fence, his shoulders hunched, his face turned away from the burning barn. Ruth walked over to him. She didn't touch him. She just stood beside him and waited. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, Ruth. I know. I should have stopped it. That first time. That first time she cut your hair, I should have. You were scared. I understand, scared. That's not an excuse. No, it's not, but it's a start. He looked at her then, and his eyes were red and wet, and he was 26 years old, and looked about 12. What do I do now? You go home. You watch your mother. And the next time she tries to break someone, because she will. Warren, it's all she knows, you stand up, the way you did tonight. He nodded, wiped his face with his sleeve, and started walking down the road toward town. Ruth watched him go until his shape dissolved into the darkness. She turned back to find Silas dousing the last of the barn fire with bucket after bucket of water from the pump. His shirt soaked, his bandaged hand dark with grime. Hetty sat on the porch step, cradling her burned arm, the shotgun across her knees. Ruth picked up a bucket and joined Silas at the pump. They worked side by side without speaking, hauling and pouring until the flames were out and the barn was nothing but a skeleton of charred beams standing against a sky full of stars. When it was done, Silas sat down in the dirt, just sat his back against the fence post, his legs stretched out, his hands on his knees. He stared at what was left of the barn he'd built with his grief and his hands, and the memory of a woman who'd told him to stay. Ruth sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I'm sorry about the barn," she said. "Wood and nails." His voice was hoarse from the smoke. "I can build another one." "You built that one for Eliza." "I built it because I was drowning and I needed something to hold on to." He turned his head and looked at her. Soot on his face, burn on his hand, exhaustion in every line of his body. But his eyes were clear. "I'm not drowning anymore." Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out Thomas's razor. She held it in her open palm, looking at it for a long moment. Then she folded Silas's fingers around it. "What's this for?" he asked. "I kept it as proof that someone once chose me. I don't need the proof anymore." He looked at the razor, then at her, and something passed between them that had no name, not love, not yet, but the raw material of it. The foundation. The first boards laid on new ground. "Keep it," he said, pressing it back into her hand. "It's part of your story. Don't give away your story for anyone. Not even me." Ruth closed her fingers around the razor and held it against her chest. The metal was warm from his hand. From the porch, Hetty's voice carried dry and tired and unmistakably alive. "If you two are done having a moment, I could use somebody to wrap this arm before I pass out and ruin your nice porch with my blood." Ruth laughed. It came out startled and rough, more like a cough than a laugh, but it was real. She stood and pulled Silas up with her, and they walked to the porch where Hetty waited, and Ruth tended the burn the way her father had taught her yarrow paste and clean cloth and steady hands, while Silas boiled water, and the night turned slow and quiet around them. The barn was gone. The fire was out. Agnes was on her way home, with the ashes of her authority crumbling in her lap, and in the cabin, where a dead woman's curtains still hung on the windows, 3 people sat around a table, drinking coffee, alive and whole, and changed in ways they couldn't yet measure. Ruth held her cup in both hands and felt the warmth of it seep into her palms. Her lip was still split. Her hair was still ragged. Her ribs still ached from where Agnes had pressed her against the trough a lifetime ago. Was it only 2 days? But she was sitting at a table where no one would hit her for speaking. She was drinking coffee that no one would take from her hands. And across the table, a man with soot on his face and a burned hand and a barn full of ashes was looking at her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. Hetty left at first light, her burned arm wrapped tight in clean cloth, the shotgun balanced across her saddle with her good hand. She'd refused to stay the night, said she needed to open the store by 7, or people would talk more than they already were. "Let them talk," Silas had said. "Easy for you. You don't sell them flour." Hetty mounted the mule one-handed, wincing but steady. She looked down at Ruth from the saddle. "You come into town when you're ready, not before. And when you do, you walk in through the front door of my store, and you hold your head up, and you don't look away from a single one of them. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." Hetty turned the mule and rode out without looking back the way she did everything forward, certain done. Ruth stood on the porch and watched her go. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the morning air, and behind the cabin, the charred bones of the barn stood black against the pale sky. The horses had come back on their own overnight, drawn by habit, and the smell of the hay that Ruth had scattered near the corral. The sorrel mare stood near the fence weight on her bad hoof, her head low and calm. "She's better," Silas said, coming up beside Ruth with 2 cups of coffee. "You can see it in how she stands. Another week of soaking and she'll be sound." Ruth took the cup. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint the way Silas always made it. She'd stopped wincing at the taste. "What are you going to do about the barn?" "Rebuild." "With what the timber's gone. You'd need to cut new posts, haul them in." "Then I'll cut new posts and haul them in." "By yourself." "Done it before." Ruth sipped her coffee and said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "You don't have to do everything by yourself anymore." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. She held his gaze, and the thing that had been growing between them, unnamed, unspoken, built from shared danger and quiet mornings, and the way their hands moved around each other in the small cabin, without colliding, pressed against the space between them, like something alive. "I know," he said. They spent the morning clearing the wreckage. It was brutal work, dragging charred beams into a pile, salvaging what hardware they could, shoveling ash until their arms ached and their faces were black with soot. Ruth worked without stopping, without complaining, matching Silas load for load. When he tried to take the heavier end of a crossbeam, she pulled it back. "I've got it. Your ribs are mine to worry about. Lift your end." By noon, the ground where the barn had stood was cleared down to the foundation stones. They sat on the porch, eating cold biscuits from Hetty's basket, both of them filthy, both of them exhausted. And Ruth felt something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died, the particular satisfaction of hard labor done alongside someone who trusted you to carry your share. "Silas." "Yeah. I want to ride into town." His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "When?" "Tomorrow." "That's soon." "If I wait, it gets harder." Agnes has had 2 days to tell her version. Every day I stay out here is another day people only hear her side. "You don't owe those people an explanation." "No, but I owe myself one." Ruth set down her biscuit. "For 3 years I was invisible. I walked through that town with my head down and my mouth shut, and everybody saw what Agnes wanted them to see. A cursed woman, a burden, a thief. I need them to see me. The real me. Even if it's just once." Silas studied her face. Whatever he saw there must have settled something in him, because he nodded. "I'll ride with you." "I need to do this alone." "I know you can do it alone. I'm riding with you because I want to. There's a difference." Ruth looked at him, and something cracked open inside her chest. Not pain, not grief, but something warmer. Something that had been locked down so long, she'd forgotten it was there. "All right," she said. "Together." That afternoon, Ruth walked to the creek bed where the yarrow grew. She picked a fresh bundle and brought it to the mare's stall, what was left of it, a makeshift shelter Silas had rigged from salvaged boards and a canvas tarp. She soaked the hoof again, working the abscess with gentle pressure, murmuring low, while the mare stood quiet. When she looked up, Silas was watching from the fence. Not her hands, her face. The way she talked to the animal, the way her fingers moved without hesitation over the swollen flesh, the steadiness that had replaced the trembling she'd carried when he first lifted her onto his horse 2 days ago. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how wrong Agnes was. About all of it." He pushed off the fence and walked to her. "You're not cursed, Ruth. You're the opposite of cursed. Everything you touch starts healing." She stood up the yarrow paste still on her fingers, her dress stained with ash and horse sweat and creek water. Her hair stuck up in ragged tufts. She looked by any measure like a woman who'd been through a war. "You really believe that?" she asked. I've got a horse that tried to bite me for 2 weeks. You walked into her stall on your first morning, and she let you touch her. I've been sitting in a dead woman's house for 6 years, and you've been here 3 days, and I'm clearing ground for a new barn." He stopped a foot from her. "Yeah, I believe it." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. Her throat was tight. "Silas, I need to tell you something." "All right." "I'm scared. Not of Coy. Not of Agnes. I'm scared of this." She gestured between them, a small motion that held everything she couldn't say. "Every person I've trusted has either died or hurt me. Thomas died. Agnes made me think I deserved it. And now you're standing here saying things that make me want to believe again. And I'm terrified because I don't know what I'll do if I'm wrong." Silas didn't reach for her, didn't close the distance. He stood exactly where he was and let her words settle between them like dust after a long ride. "You're not wrong," he said. "But I can't prove that with words. Only time proves it. And I've got time. What if I'm broken, Silas? What if Agnes broke something in me that doesn't grow back? Then we'll figure out what grows in its place. That mare's never going to run like she could before the abscess. But she'll run. Different, maybe. But she'll run." Ruth closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, and she didn't try to hide it. "I haven't cried in 3 years. Agnes said crying was weakness, and after a while I believed her. Crying's not weakness. Crying's what happens when you finally stop holding the wall up." The first tear fell, then another. Ruth pressed her hands to her face and let it come, all of it, 3 years of swallowed grief and silent pain, and the terrible effort of pretending to be stone when everything inside her was flesh. She didn't sob. She just let the tears run quiet and steady while the mare nuzzled her shoulder, and Silas stood close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough to let her stand on her own. When it passed, she wiped her face with her sleeve and took a long, shuddering breath. "I got your shirt wet." It was already wet. She laughed. A real laugh, rough and surprised, the kind that comes after something breaks loose. Silas smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him, the kind that changed his whole face, and took 10 years off and showed her exactly what Eliza must have fallen in love with. "There it is," Ruth said softly. "There's what... your smile. I was starting to think you didn't have one. Haven't had much reason, until recently." They stood there in the wreckage of his barn, two people who'd buried their loves and carried their grief, and somehow ended up in the same broken place at the same broken time, and the afternoon light fell warm around them, and neither of them moved away. The next morning, Ruth put on the cleanest dress she had, the one she'd mended on the porch, the torn seam now straight and tight. She washed her face, combed what was left of her hair with her fingers, and tucked Thomas's razor into her pocket. Not for protection, for remembrance, for the woman she'd been before Agnes and the woman she was becoming after. Silas saddled the gelding. They rode double into town the way they'd ridden out Ruth in front, Silas behind his arm, steady around her. But this time Ruth sat straight. Her chin was up. Her eyes were open. Copper Bend on a Tuesday morning was busy enough. Wagons at the feed store, women at the well, men loading supplies on the boardwalk. When Ruth and Silas rode in, the talking stopped. Not all at once. It moved through the town like a wave. First the women at the well who turned and stared. Then the men on the boardwalk who set down their crates. Then the children who stopped their games and watched with wide eyes. Ruth felt every stare like a hand pressing against her chest. But she didn't look down. She remembered Hetty's words. "Hold your head up, don't look away," and she held. They dismounted in front of Hetty's store. Hetty was already in the doorway, her burned arm in a sling, her expression fierce and proud. "About time," Hetty said. "Get in here, I've got coffee on." Ruth stepped onto the boardwalk. Behind her she heard footsteps, not threatening, just curious. People gathering the way people do when something unusual walks through their town. A woman's voice came from the crowd. "Martha Gaines, the preacher's wife. Ruth Calloway." Ruth turned. Martha stood at the edge of the boardwalk, her hands clasped in front of her, her face carrying the uncomfortable expression of a woman who'd looked the other way for 3 years and was just now feeling the weight of it. "I heard what happened," Martha said carefully, "at the Pruitt place. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Someone should have—" "Yes," Ruth said. "Someone should have." Martha flinched, but Ruth didn't soften it. She let the words stand because they were true, and truth was a muscle she was learning to use again. "But you're here now," Ruth added. "That counts for something." Another woman stepped forward, old Della Hutchins, who ran the boarding house. "Agnes told us you were trouble. Said you brought sickness on the family. Said, Agnes shoved my face into a horse trough and held me under water until I blacked out," Ruth said, clear and steady, loud enough for everyone on the street to hear. "She cut my hair 5 times in 3 years. She starved me. She made me sleep on the floor in winter. And she filed a false warrant claiming I stole silver that doesn't exist." The street went silent. Ruth could hear the flag on the post office snapping in the wind. "I didn't come here to ask for pity," she continued. "I came here because this is my town too. I lived here as Thomas Pruitt's wife, and I stayed here as Agnes Pruitt's prisoner, and I'm standing here now as myself. Ruth Calloway, and I'm not going to be invisible anymore." Doc Saunders stepped off the boardwalk across the street and walked over. He was a thin man, with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "Mrs. Calloway, I owe you an apology. Hetty asked me to speak up, and I declined. That was cowardice, and I won't dress it up as anything else." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I've written a formal statement documenting the injuries I observed on your person when you came through town 2 years ago, bruising on your arms, malnutrition signs of prolonged physical abuse. I noted it in my records at the time but did nothing. This statement is for the sheriff when he returns." Ruth took the paper. Her hands were steady. "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me. I'm 3 years late." From inside the store, Hetty called out, "There's more. Come inside, Ruth." Ruth walked into the store, Silas behind her. On the counter sat a wooden crate filled with goods: flour, salt, dried beans, a bolt of blue cotton fabric, a pair of work gloves, a tin of salve, and sitting on top of it all, a silver hair comb. Simple, not fancy, but polished clean and engraved with tiny wildflowers along the spine. "That's from me," Hetty said, "for when it grows back." Ruth picked up the comb and turned it over in her fingers. The metal was warm from the sun coming through the store window. "The rest is from the women in town," Hetty continued. "Martha brought the fabric. Della brought the flour. Even Sarah Tucker, yes, wife of the man who rode with Coy, she dropped off the gloves this morning before dawn, left them on my step with a note that said, 'I'm sorry I married a fool.'" Ruth's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose until she could speak. "I thought nobody cared." "Everybody cared. They just didn't know how to show it without crossing Agnes. Agnes had this town under her thumb the same way she had you with fear and shame, and the threat of what she'd say about you if you stepped out of line." Hetty put her good hand on Ruth's shoulder. "You broke that. Not Silas. Not me. You. When you stood in front of that fence last night and said, 'It stops here,' you broke it." Ruth set the comb down and hugged Hetty, carefully mindful of the burned arm, but tight enough to mean it. Hetty hugged her back, one-armed and fierce, and neither of them said a word because the words had already been said, and what was left was just the holding on. When they walked back outside, the crowd had grown. Not hostile, not pitying, just there. Watching a woman they'd ignored for 3 years stand in the sunlight and refuse to disappear. Silas was leaning against the hitching post, arms, crossed, hat pulled low. Ruth walked to him and stopped. "You didn't say a word in there," she said. "Wasn't my story to tell?" "Thank you for knowing that. Thank you for telling it." They rode home in the late morning, the crate of goods balanced across the saddle. the silver comb in Ruth's pocket next to Thomas's razor. Two things that meant two different kinds of love, one she'd lost, one she was finding. 3 days later, the sheriff rode in. Ed Mackey was a big man with a quiet voice and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough frontier justice to know that the law was only as good as the people enforcing it. He listened to Ruth's account. He read Hetty's written testimony. He reviewed Doc Saunders's statement. He rode out to the Pruitt place and came back with the false warrant torn in half. "Agnes won't file charges again," he told Ruth standing on Silas's porch. "I made it clear that if she does, I'll file charges of my own assault, false testimony, and abuse of a dependent. Coy's been warned. He sets foot on this property, he'll see the inside of a cell." "And Warren?" Ruth asked. "Warren's moved into the boarding house in town, working for Grady Ellis at the livery. Seems like he's trying to start over." The sheriff tipped his hat. "You're free, Mrs. Calloway, legally and otherwise." Free. Ruth stood on the porch after the sheriff left and let the words settle into her body. Free. It didn't feel like fireworks or trumpets. It felt like taking off a coat she'd been wearing so long she'd forgotten it was heavy. Summer kept on the way. Summer does, hot and long and full of work. Silas cut timber from the ridge and began framing the new barn. Ruth worked alongside him holding posts while he drove nails, hauling boards, mixing mortar for the foundation stones. Her arms grew strong. Her skin turned brown from the sun. Her hair began to grow back, slow, uneven, but growing. She planted a garden behind the cabin. Beans and squash and a row of wild herbs she'd transplanted from the creek bed. She tended the sorrel mare whose hoof healed clean, and by midsummer, the horse followed Ruth around the yard like a dog nudging her shoulder for yarrow and attention. One evening, Ruth was sitting on the porch mending a shirt when she noticed the little blue rocking chair. It was still there, still cracked, still dusty. She set down her sewing, carried the chair inside, and spent the rest of the evening fixing the broken runner with a strip of rawhide and carpenter's glue she found in Silas's toolbox. When she was done, she carried it back to the porch and set it next to the bench. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Just placed where it belonged. Part of the home, part of the history. Part of the man she was growing to love. Silas came back from the pasture at dusk and stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at the chair for a long time. Ruth watched his face from the bench and said nothing. "You fixed the runner," he said finally. "It needed fixing." "I couldn't—" His voice caught. He pressed his thumb and finger against the bridge of his nose and breathed slow. "I couldn't bring myself to touch it." "I know. That's why I did it." Ruth patted the bench beside her. "Sit with me." He climbed the steps and sat. The bench creaked under their combined weight. Between them, the little chair sat solid on its mended runner, rocking gently when the breeze caught it. "Bess would have liked you," Silas said. His voice was rough but clear. "She liked anyone who was kind to animals." "Tell me about her." So he did. For the first time in 6 years, Silas talked about his daughter, how she named every chicken, how she tried to ride the barn cat, how she once fell asleep in the horse trough on a hot day and gave Eliza a heart attack. He talked, and Ruth listened, and somewhere in the telling, the grief that had been a locked door inside him cracked open just enough to let the light through. When he finished, Ruth reached into her pocket and set 2 things on the porch rail between them: Thomas's razor and the silver comb Hetty had given her. "Thomas chose me when nobody else would," she said. "And you stood for me when nobody else did. I don't want to forget either one." Silas picked up the comb. He turned it over in his hands, the wildflowers catching the last of the light. Then he turned to her. "Your hair's getting long enough to hold this." "Almost." "Can I?" She nodded. His fingers rough-scarred the hands of a man who broke wild horses and built barns from grief, slid the comb into her hair just above her left ear, where the auburn waves had grown thick enough to grip it. His touch was so gentle she almost couldn't feel it, and so deliberate she felt it everywhere. "There," he said. Ruth reached up and touched the comb. It held. She smiled, not the small, cautious smile of the woman who'd knelt in the Pruitt stable with water in her lungs. A real smile. Full and open and unafraid. Silas Drummond. Ruth Calloway. I think I'm going to stay. I was hoping you'd say that. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I want that to be clear. Hetty offered me a room above the store. Doc Saunders said there's a family in Cheyenne looking for someone who knows herb medicine. I have choices now. I know you do. I'm choosing this one. I'm choosing you. Not because you saved me, I saved myself. You just showed up at the right time. I'm choosing you because you let me be angry and scared and broken, and you didn't try to fix me. You just stood there and held the door open until I was ready to walk through it. Silas took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and it closed around her fingers the way he held everything steady, patient, without any intention of letting go. I'm not good at speeches, he said. Eliza used to say I couldn't talk my way out of a paper bag. But I'll tell you this much. I've spent 6 years in a house with a dead woman's curtains on the windows and a broken rocking chair on the porch, telling myself that was enough. That grief was the same as living. It's not. And you, Ruth, you walked in here with nothing, with less than nothing, and you made this place feel like a home again. Not Eliza's home, not a museum. A real living home, with a garden, and a horse that follows you around, and coffee that's too strong and... Your coffee is too strong. My coffee is fine. But he was smiling. That full, rare smile that changed his face and made her heart hammer against her ribs. What I'm saying is, I'd like to build that new barn with you. And I'd like to sit on this porch with you when it's done. And if one day you decide you want my name alongside yours, I'll be the proudest man in Wyoming territory. Ruth leaned into him. Her head found the place on his shoulder where it fit exactly right, and his arm came around her, and the little blue rocking chair swayed in the breeze beside them. Ask me in the fall, she said. When the barn's finished, and my hair's long enough to wear down, and I've had time to learn who I am without somebody else's hand on my neck. I'll ask you in the fall. And I'll say yes. You sure about that? Silas, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The summer held them in its long golden light, and the land stretched out wide and open around them, and the sorrel mare whinnied from the new corral, and somewhere in the cabin the kettle began to whistle. Ruth Calloway had walked into this place with a split lip and butchered hair and nothing in her pockets but a dead man's razor. She sat here now with a comb in her hair and a garden in the ground, and a man beside her who'd burned a barn down to ash and started building again, because that's what you do when you've lost everything. And someone walks in and shows you that everything wasn't gone. It was just waiting. The scars didn't disappear. They never do. Agnes Pruitt still lived in her house at the edge of town. Her jaw locked, her silence louder than her cruelty had ever been. Coy drank at the saloon and avoided Silas's name like a curse. Warren swept the livery floor and carried the weight of years he couldn't take back. But Ruth didn't carry them anymore. She'd set that burden down in the dirt of Silas Drummond's yard on a summer night lit by a burning barn, and she'd stood in the ashes and said, "It stops here," and it had. Not because someone rescued her, not because the world suddenly turned kind, but because she'd found her own voice in the place where they'd tried to drown it, and she'd used it, and it had been enough. She was enough. She'd always been enough. It just took a horse trough and a loner and a long ride west to finally hear the truth of it. And that truth, solid, unshakable, earned in fire and water, and the stubborn refusal to stay broken, was the only foundation any life ever needed.